Hey guys, tonight we slip on something you've probably never even seen outside of a museum diorama, a medieval straw helmet. Yes, imagine yourself tugging this clumsy, scratchy dome down over your head. It doesn't quite fit, and a few bits of straw jab at your cheeks. You can't see much through the woven reeds, and you start to wonder if this was really a good idea. You probably won't survive this outfit in real life. Between the stings, the lack of vision, and the itchy chin strap, you'd give up before the bees even noticed you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a medieval meadow, the hum of bees floating over the grass. The air is thick with clover and wild thyme, and in the distance you see small domed hives, woven straw skeps, clustered like squat little houses. A beekeeper trudges up, helmet bobbing awkwardly on his head, looking like he got lost on the way to a village harvest festival. You copy his movements, clumsy but careful, brushing against the buzzing clouds as he approaches the hives. Why straw helmets at all? It's not that medieval folks lacked imagination. Leather hoods existed. Metal was abundant, if uncomfortable, but straw was cheap, breathable, and easy to weave. The helmet wasn't meant to stop every sting. It was like wearing a mosquito net that doubled as headgear. The idea was that bees might just glance off the woven barrier, distracted before they reached your skin. Historians still argue whether this gear was genuinely effective or more of a symbolic comfort blanket, something to make the beekeeper feel braver when facing thousands of airborne needles. The mainstream fact, by the 12th century, beekeeping was already a respected trade in Europe. Monasteries especially prized bees for their wax, essential for church candles, a quirky tidbit. Some helmets were rumoured to have herbs tucked inside, like thyme or sage, because it was believed the scent calmed the bees. And honestly, it probably just made the beekeeper smell like a walking stew pot. You adjust your helmet, noticing a faint whiff of crushed lavender pressed into the weave. Through the helmet's narrow slits, you watch bees zigzag with mechanical focus. Your ears pick up the layered hum, soft at first, then swelling until it feels like the meadow itself is vibrating. It's oddly soothing, like nature's own white noise machine. Except every once in a while, one bee lands right on your helmet, crawling across the straw. You can't see it, but you feel the tiny weight moving. You freeze, trying not to sneeze. Medieval manuals warned beekeepers, do not breathe too heavily near the hive or the bees may take it as aggression. That's right, your noisy nostrils could be a death sentence. And here's where modern sarcasm creeps in. Imagine being taken out not by sword or plague, but because you had hay fever and forgot to muffle a sneeze. It's not exactly the heroic ending bards sing about. You shuffle forward, trying to mimic the beekeeper's calm gestures. He carries a small, smouldering bundle, early smoke to keep the bees docile. The smoke curls around you, faintly sweet, faintly choking, and your straw helmet traps it just long enough to make your eyes water. You blink, tears leaking down your cheeks, hoping no one's watching. The beekeeper doesn't even flinch. Maybe practice makes perfect. There's also a philosophical layer here. To medieval villagers, bees weren't just insects, they were almost mystical. They pollinated crops, provided honey, and produced wax that lit up cathedrals. Facing them required both courage and humility, so the straw helmet wasn't only practical, it was ritual. A beekeeper wasn't charging into war, he was entering a buzzing cathedral of wings. Your helmet is less armor than a monk's hood, signaling respect. Of course, the practical side sneaks in. With your limited vision and muffled hearing, you stumble a little. The straw scratches your scalp, and you feel like a clumsy scarecrow. You start to wonder, did anyone ever trip straight into the hive? Historians still argue whether early illustrations of toppled beekeepers were satire or accurate warnings. Either way, you can picture the disaster. The afternoon sun warms the straw, making your helmet smell faintly like baked bread. It's oddly comforting, even as bees thrum past your ears. You remind yourself, stay calm, keep breathing lightly, move slowly. The beekeeper taps one of the skeps, and you imagine the thousands of bees inside, each with a role, each part of a humming society that doesn't particularly care about your straw fashion statement, and that's where we leave. You for now, standing awkwardly in your itchy, improbable helmet, half protected, half exposed, and fully immersed in the strange, soothing world of medieval beekeeping. You shuffle along behind the beekeeper, the straw helmet making every sound muffled, as if you're moving through a world wrapped in linen. The village opens up around you, and you realize bees aren't kept hidden in some secret forest. No. Hives are right here, sitting in small clearings tucked beside gardens, even pressed against the walls of cottages. You look around and see skeps lined up like plump little soldiers, some covered with thatch against the rain, others simply balanced on wooden planks. The mainstream fact here is simple. Medieval Europeans commonly kept their bees in these woven straw hives called skeps. They weren't just randomly placed either. The beekeeper thought carefully about orientation, usually setting them to face the morning sun so the bees would stir early and make the most of daylight. You notice how methodical it all feels. Honey wasn't a casual treat, it was a vital part of village life. But here's a quirky tidbit. In some places, villagers believed hives should never be moved suddenly, or the bees would get confused and fly away forever. If they had to be shifted, it was done at night, with hushed voices, as if sneaking a cradle past sleeping children. You can picture yourself tiptoeing through a field, arms wobbling under the weight of a hive, whispering apologies to the bees inside. And, of course, historians still argue whether hives in every village were community-owned or private property. Some evidence suggests monasteries controlled entire fields of bees, while peasants had to rent hives the way you might rent a horse. Other records hint that nearly every smallholder family might have kept at least one skep tucked by their garden. Either way, honey was everywhere, but not cheap. You crouch lower, peeking through the helmet slits at the activity in front of one skep. Bees crawl in and out in a steady line like commuters' squeezy. Hang on to a morning train. Their bodies shine gold in the sun, wings flashing like glass shards. You marvel at the neatness of it all. No traffic jams, no wasted time, just buzzing precision. The beekeeper gestures to you with a gloved hand, though glove is generous. It's more like a wad of cloth wrapped around his fingers. Leather gloves weren't always common, and besides, bulky hands made it hard to handle delicate frames of comb. You wiggle your own hands nervously, half wishing you had a full suit of armor. But of course, armor would clank, trap heat, and probably annoy the bees even more. Your straw helmet suddenly feels like the lesser of two discomforts. The sound rises around you, low hums, high-pitched zings, the tiny percussion of wings bouncing off straw walls. It's hypnotic, like a droning choir. You catch yourself swaying, lulled by the rhythm. And then a bee lands right on the helmet's slit, its face staring at you, antennas twitching. You freeze. Does it see you? Do bees judge fashion choices? If so, you're in trouble. It buzzes away, uninterested. Your heart, though, keeps pounding. You feel the absurdity of standing here in a field with a basket on your head, pretending this is completely normal. You almost laugh, but you stifle it. After all, laughter vibrates, and vibration is basically shouting in bee language. Best not to joke around too loudly near several thousand stingers. Still, You can't help a sly thought. Medieval beekeeping villages must have looked hilarious from a distance. Figures in lumpy straw helmets shuffling about like confused scarecrows, puffing smoke, whispering respectfully to insects. And yet, within those hives, the promise of golden honey glistened. That contradiction, awkward human rituals versus miraculous bee alchemy, feels like the entire medieval experience in miniature. You glance back toward the cottages. A child peeks from behind a door, watching. To them, bees are dangerous, but also magical. Maybe they've been told stories of how bees carried news of births and deaths to the hive, or that ignoring the bees' welfare would curse the household. To a medieval villager, these buzzing creatures weren't just livestock, they were part of the family's fate. The beekeeper lifts one skep gently, his arms straining. He tips it to inspect underneath, looking for signs of rot or intruders like mice. The straw creaks and you wonder how long each hive lasted, usually only a year or two before wear and weather forced new weaving. It was a cycle. Grow crops, harvest straw, build hives, harvest honey, repeat. And here you are, tangled up in the rhythm of village life, helmet scratching at your temples, bees thrumming in your ears. The sun dips a little lower, casting long shadows over the meadow. You feel the warmth fading, replaced by a cool breeze. The bees, too, slow their pace, adjusting to the waning day. You follow their motion, steady and soothing, like lanterns dimming one by one. And you realize, for all the strangeness of this gear and this work, the setting itself feels almost peaceful. You're part of the hum, part of the village, part of the fragile yet enduring dance between humans and bees. You shift the weight of your helmet slightly, the straw scratching your ears, and follow the beekeeper into the heart of the village. The closer you get, the more obvious it becomes that honey is no trivial hobby here, it's treasure. You see it in the way jars are stored carefully on shelves, wrapped in cloth, even sealed with wax to prevent spoilage. Honey, in the medieval world, is as close as people get to sugar. And sugar, at this point, is a rare and exotic import, more likely to show up in the palace kitchens of kings than on the table of a peasant. The mainstream fact: honey was central to medieval diets, not just for sweetness, but for preservation. People used it to glaze meats, to extend the shelf life of fruit, to brew mead, and to disguise the taste of foods that had lingered a bit too long in the pantry. You lift a spoon to your mouth, thick amber honey oozing slowly, and you understand why it was called liquid gold. A quirky tidbit for you: some villages treated honey as a form of currency. A certain number of pounds of honey could be owed to a monastery in place of taxes. You can imagine yourself standing nervously before a monk, offering up a sticky jar instead of coins, praying he doesn't notice that your dog already licked some off the rim. Historians still argue whether honey was more valuable as food or as wax. Both were crucial. Wax lit up monasteries and homes alike, but honey touched every part of daily life. And let's be real, you can't snack on candles no matter how desperate you are. As you wander further, you see a merchant setting out honeycombs at a market stall. They glisten in the afternoon light, hexagons perfect enough to make even a mathematician swoon. Children hover, hoping for a small taste, but the merchant swats them away. This is profit, not candy. You watch one child sulk, probably scheming how to sneak a fingerful later. You smile beneath your straw helmet. Some things never change. The beekeeper leads you to a cottage where a woman stirs honey into a clay pot of warm milk. She offers you a sip. The sweetness coats your tongue, a soothing contrast to the earthy taste of the straw pressing against your lips. It feels almost luxurious, and for a moment you forget you're supposed to be working. The air inside the cottage is thick with beeswax. Candles drip on wooden shelves, their scent faintly floral. A pot simmers by the fire, and the beekeeper mentions honey as a base for ointments rubbed onto wounds, mixed with herbs, spread on cloth. You nod, though your helmet makes it hard to express enthusiasm. Still, you realize honey isn't just dessert, it's survival. Now, a moment of humor. Imagine medieval dinner parties, guests leaning over trenchers of meat, dripping honey everywhere, beards sticky, sleeves ruined. No neat napkins, no hand sanitizer, just a communal bowl of water, probably as murky as the local pond. If you're trying to picture it, think less fine dining and more sticky toddler birthday party. The beekeeper explains that monasteries often hoarded the best honey, sending it to royalty or saving it for elaborate religious feasts. You picture monks secretly sneaking a spoonful late at night, whispering apologies to the bees outside. After all, even the pious couldn't resist. You step back outside, honey still warming your throat. The village seems different now, less like a random scattering of cottages, more like an economy built around golden sweetness. Everyone depends on it, the cook, the healer, the priest, even the tax collector. Honey isn't just food, it's glue, literally and socially, binding the village together. But behind it all, always buzzing, are the bees, and the strange, scratchy straw helmet you're still wearing, reminding you that this sweetness comes at a cost. Every drop of honey required patience, risk, and a willingness to look a little ridiculous while covered in buzzing insects. You glance at a child chewing on stolen honeycomb and you think, worth it. You feel the pitch of the meadow change, like a room where someone just turned up a fan, and you know the bees are alert. A few drones bump your straw helmet with the dull thud of tiny grapes, and then the workers spiral up from the skep in a glittering swirl. Instinct says run, the helmet says stay. You dig your heels into the grass and remind yourself to breathe slowly, as if you're pretending to sleep through a thunderstorm. The beekeeper beside you lifts his smouldering wick, not quite a modern smoker, more like a twist of rags and punk wood, and lets the smoke drift in a soft, apologetic cloud. You can smell it through the straw, woody and sweet, and you feel the tension in the air loosen half a notch. This is where you learn the first rule of hazardous peacekeeping. Your body is a message, and the bees can read it. Sudden gestures translate as intruder, jangly jewelry becomes clangy alarm, and your exhale is basically a horn blast in bee acoustics. You slacken your shoulders, you soften your wrists, you pretend you are a breeze rather than a person wearing a basket on your head. It's a good acting exercise and also a decent life skill for family gatherings. The mainstream fact clicks into place. Smoke has been used since antiquity to calm bees by interrupting alarm pheromones and nudging them to gorge on honey, which makes them less inclined to sting. You watch the keeper waft smoke by the entrance, never blasting, just persuading. He once told you that smoke is a polite cough, not a fire drill. The swarm's pitch drops from sharp violin to cello, still music, just less frantic. Of course, hazards remain. A worker's barbed stinger can catch your skin like a tiny fishhook, and once lodged it keeps pumping venom. In Europe, where your straw helmet is fashionably in season, the species you're dancing with is Apis mellifera, hard-working, loyal to the hive, and unim, pressed by your comedic timing. A sting burns, then warms, then settles into a throbbing that feels as if your heartbeat relocated to your forearm. You've likely had a few by now. Your helmet can't cover everything. Part of the job is making peace with prickling pain. You try to frame it as locally sourced medieval acupuncture. A quirky tidbit drifts in on the smoke. Some villagers dusted a rising swarm with flour so it would look claimed, a moving snowball that proved whose bees they were if the cluster settled on a neighbour's tree. You picture yourself flinging handfuls of baking flour at a cloud of insects while your helmet sheds breadcrumbs of straw, like you're simultaneously cooking and being cooked. Effective, debatable, memorable, absolutely. Historians still argue whether medieval beekeepers faced their worst stings during spring swarms or autumn harvests. Swarms can be oddly gentle, engorged and house hunting, but the harvest, especially with skeps, meant cutting combs and sometimes destroying brood, a provocation even the calmest congregation of insects wouldn't ignore. The debate stretches further. Historians still argue whether keepers routinely killed entire colonies with sulfur fumes after the last flow to harvest wax and honey, or whether many practiced more careful, non-lethal driving methods to move bees to empty skeps. Either way, you stand here as witness to the razor-thin line between craft and calamity. You learn to read weather as another hazard. Bees dislike sudden cold, pounding rain, and the damp heaviness that precedes a storm. Today the sky is clean, but you can feel faint eddies of wind, and you tuck that note away. The keeper taught you that on blustery days the straw helmet becomes a sail. Turn your head too fast and you'll literally catch wind like a boat. You steady your neck, king of calm, captain of the world's smallest wicker ship. Your hands hum with that electric on-edge feeling that comes just before a sting, like the air has opinions. You can almost sense where not to place a finger. You slide a palm along the hive's side, listening. The bees answer in layered vibrations. If it sounds buzzy but steady, you're welcome. If the note tightens into a collective hiss, that's the medieval equivalent of a neighborhood watch clearing its throat. Carefully, you stop. You admire how something so soft can warn so clearly. When stings happen, and they will, you have remedies. Villagers swear by vinegar, onion slices, or a paste of clay. A healer once dabbed your wrist with mashed plantain leaf, cool as shade. Another grandmother prescribed a dab of honey right on the sting, which feels charmingly optimistic, like asking the problem to fix itself. You try not to think about the time someone suggested other liquids. Medieval life contains many solutions. Some should stay in the past. The beekeeper demonstrates a slow retreat, a choreography that looks like backing away from a noble person you radically respect but also fear. You copy him, step by step, a courtly bow enacted by your entire body. It's almost funny. Nearly everything about this job is dignified and ridiculous at the same time. You in your straw helmet, he in his layered cloth, both of you trying to look like trees with excellent posture. Joke 1. If fashion is pain, medieval beekeeping is Paris Fashion Week. You think of value again, how honey doubles as rent and wax as light, and suddenly the hazards feel less optional and more like the admission price to the Golden Theatre. The village needs candles for evening prayers, salves for scraped knees, sweetness for winter porridges that never quite forget they were oats. You're not a daredevil, you're a provider in a helmet that doubles as a picnic basket. There's a social hazard too. Bees carry news, people say. You should tell the bees about births and deaths, weddings and departures, or they might sulk, swarm, or die. Whether the insects care is uncertain, but the ritual matters. It gives the village a way to hold grief and joy in the same pair of hands. Historians still argue whether these courtesies sprang from pre-Christian practices or later folklore layered onto everyday chores. You won't settle that tonight. You'll just lift the edge of your helmet and whisper, hoping respect is a universal language. The beekeeper taps your arm and points to a cluster forming on a low branch. Scouts waggle in measured figure eights, the famous waggle dance that maps sun angles and sweet distances. Mainstream fact folded into real life. Bees communicate direction and range by dancing. You want to cheer for them, but you remember that cheering is mostly yelling, and yelling is mostly a bad idea when you're wearing a porous hat near winged opinions. Joke 2. You offer a silent golf clap, which is also excellent bee etiquette. A drone blunders into your chest like a tiny dirigible, harmless, just loud. Workers zip by your cheeks, inspecting the moving haystack. You stay still enough to be furniture. It's astonishing how quickly fear can become focus. Minutes ago, the thought of stings filled your mind like thunder. Now you're parsing micro-gestures and air currents, a translator between species who share daylight and agendas. It's mundane magic, and your helmet, ridiculous, endearing, marginally effective, puts just enough space between you and panic to do the job. Joke 3 arrives in the shape of a mental note. If anyone asks what you did today, you'll say, "Oh, I wore a straw helmet and negotiated with several thousand bees about property rights." Sounds absurd, feels accurate. By late afternoon, the hazard band loosens, the swarm recoalesces, the hive returns to housekeeping, and the meadow exhale resumes. Stings still tingle, but they become background, like tiny doorbells someone forgot to remove. You check your sleeves for accidental passengers and brush them off gently, a polite usher at the world's quietest theatre. You leave the hive with the humility of someone who has been corrected, not punished. Bees aren't out to get you. They're out to get on with it. Your job is to become background enough that they can. The helmet stays in place, straw infused with smoke and sun, smelling faintly of toasted fields. You trail the beekeeper back toward the stacked skeps, legs buzzing with the day's lessons, grateful that risk and reward hum in the same key, and that tonight's dinner will be a little sweeter for it. You kneel in the meadow with a bundle of straw between your knees, the itch of your helmet reminding you that the beekeeper's oddest tool is also his simplest. The hives around you hum like sleepy kettles, and you find yourself staring at the materials in your hands, long, hollow stalks of rye straw, flexible yet tough. This is where the helmet is born, not in a workshop of iron and hammer, but in a quiet field after harvest when surplus stalks are gathered and set aside. The mainstream fact, medieval skeps and helmets alike were woven from rye or wheat straw, sometimes bound with split bramble or willow rods for strength. Villagers spent long winter evenings braiding coils, the same technique used to build baskets. Helmets were less common than skeps, but when made, they followed the same principle. A coiled spiral tightened into a dome large enough to slip over the head. You trace the ridges with your fingers, feeling the grooves where needles or thorns once slid through to stitch the layers tight. The quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest herbs were woven right into the structure. Sprigs of sage or lavender tucked between coils, thought to calm bees with their fragrance. It makes your helmet smell faintly like a medieval herb garden, though it also gives you the unsettling sense you might be simmering in a soup stock. You imagine villagers chuckling at the sight of you, half scarecrow, half kitchen bundle. Historians still argue whether these helmets were primarily protection or ceremony. Were they daily workwear, or did they emerge only during festivals, symbolic demonstrations of the beekeeper's special status? Illustrations are sparse and often stylized, leaving scholars to squint at old woodcuts, debating whether the lump on a figure's head is a helmet or just bad drawing. You begin weaving with clumsy fingers, twisting straw into a flat circle, then curving it upward into a shallow bowl. It creaks and resists, a stubborn material that wants to stay straight. The beekeeper guides your hands, showing how to overlap, how to bind with thin willow. The smell of dry straw rises, warm, nutty, dusty, almost sweet. Soon your lap holds something resembling a bowl, though calling it a helmet feels optimistic. You lift your prototype onto your head and instantly regret it. The edges scratch your neck, flakes fall into your eyes, and the weave gaps are wide enough for a bee to stroll through with ease. The beekeeper laughs, a soft chuckle muffled under his own finished gear, and adjusts the rim for you. Tighter, always tighter, he seems to say, pointing to the stitching. You sigh, realizing that straw helmets are less a miracle of engineering and more a triumph of persistence. The helmet is heavy once completed, not crushing but noticeable, like balancing a small basket of apples on your head. Combined with the heat of summer sun, it quickly becomes a sauna for your scalp. You wipe your brow, but the sweat just soaks into the straw, making it smell faintly like damp bread. Comfort clearly wasn't high on the design list. You reflect that armourers of the time spent weeks shaping elegant steel helms, fitted to each knight. Beekeepers, by contrast, bent straw and prayed it didn't collapse mid-swarm, and yet both were in the business of survival. One faced swords and arrows, the other thousands of winged needles. You can't decide which you'd prefer, though at least with bees, nobody writes epic ballads about your failures. A moment of humour. You tilt your head too quickly and the helmet slips sideways, covering one eye. You instantly resemble a lopsided haystack, stumbling around blind. You try to correct it, but the motion makes the straw creak and a bee buzzes too close for comfort. You freeze, wobbling like a startled flamingo, and think medieval occupational hazards really didn't need to be this theatrical. The beekeeper demonstrates a sturdier version, his helmet closely woven, snug but not suffocating. He explains with gestures how to leave small gaps for vision, though never too wide. Otherwise, the bees would stroll right in, and no one wants to discover a honeybee crawling across their eyelid. You shudder at the thought, grateful your own weave is still too tight for that. The process is repetitive, meditative, straw coil after straw coil, bound and pressed until the helmet emerges, smelling of harvest fields, squeaking faintly when pressed. You find yourself oddly soothed, lulled by the rhythm. This is how winter evenings passed, family bent over straw, weaving skeps, weaving baskets, weaving helmets, chatting in low tones by firelight. It's a craft that turns monotony into utility. Still, historians debate whether every beekeeper even bothered with helmets. Some accounts imply that experienced keepers trusted smoke and calm demeanour over protective gear. Helmets may have been for the nervous, the novices, or those unlucky enough to swell dramatically with stings. You, your tender modern skin are exactly the sort who would wear one, whether mocked for it or not. By the time your helmet sits more firmly on your head, you feel a strange pride. It's uncomfortable, itchy, imperfect, but it's yours. You run a hand over the ridges, and the bees hum nearby, indifferent. For the first time, you almost believe this barrier of straw might hold, at least long enough to collect a little honey without becoming a pincushion. And as the sun lowers, casting warm stripes through the village, you realize the straw helmet isn't just a relic of necessity. It's also a symbol of resilience, the willingness to look ridiculous, to endure discomfort, to weave patience into every coil, all for the promise of golden sweetness waiting inside the hive. You catch your reflection in a shallow puddle and pause, because staring back is not a medieval warrior or a guildmaster, it's a scarecrow that wandered off its pole and decided to get into beekeeping. The straw helmet sits a bit crooked, the rim shading your eyes like a floppy halo, and the whole ensemble suggests a fashion show where the theme is Harvest Festival but make it practical. You give your reflection a dignified nod anyway. You're not here to impress. You're here to avoid becoming a constellation of red pinpricks. The question gnaws at you as you shuffle along. Is this protective suit actually protective, or is it just very committed theatre? You take inventory. The helmet, woven, surprisingly sturdy, with tiny sight slits and a smell that rotates between toasted grain and campfire smoke. The rest, layers of coarse linen, sleeves bound at the wrists with cord, a neckerchief tucked up to block any opportunistic explorers, and maybe, if you're lucky, an apron of thicker cloth over your chest, your less suit of armor and more bundle of laundry with opinions. The mainstream fact to anchor your self-esteem, full-body beekeeping suits as we recognize them only become common much later. Medieval keepers mixed minimal gear with technique, smoke, gentle movements and timing to manage risk. You think of that earlier whispering rule, how even your breath sends a message. The suit, such as it is, provides marginal help. The real shield is your behavior. You relax your shoulders again, as if you're listening to a lullaby rather than standing next to thousands of quick-tempered hypodermics. A quirky tidbit drifts back from something the beekeeper pantomimed while rummaging through his cottage. Some folks allegedly wore veils made from horsehair netting or repurposed fishing mesh, a gauzy compromise between visibility and sting resistance. If you lacked horse air or patience, you improvised. Window linen loosely woven, tucked under the helmet rim. You imagine the look: straw dome, breezy veil, layered tunic. If a catwalk ever opens beside the village green, you're ready for your turn. Autumn, winter, 1293, weave, but make it be. Historians still argue whether images of hooded figures in manuscripts show actual beekeepers' outfits or illustrators' symbolic shorthand, a generic worker cap used for any rural chore. Some drawings resemble potato sacks more than tailored garments, and a few helmets look suspiciously like ordinary baskets. Were artists being imprecise, or were people truly upcycling their storage containers as face protection? You glance at your own headgear and suspect both can be true, depending on the day and the size of the swarm. Walking between skeps, you notice how your sleeves catch little bits of wax and propolis, that sticky resin bees use for glue. It dots your cuffs in amber freckles, tiny badges of work. You rub a thumb over one spot and feel its tack. Propolis is a mixed blessing. It seals drafts in the hive and also turns your clothing into a magnet for every stray straw fibre in the parish. You are collecting the countryside, one speck at a time. If a gust of wind hits, you'll sound like a broom discussing philosophy. You test your range of motion, lifting your arms, twisting your torso, practicing the choreography you've learned. Slow lift, careful set, steady hands. The helmet hums faintly with your movement. You realize the true genius of the outfit isn't just the straw, it's the choice to wear things that don't flap. Medieval tailors didn't have zippers or Velcro, but they understood ties, toggles, and gravity. A stray ribbon can spook a curious worker faster than bad singing, though remember that joke from earlier. Villagers swore bees disliked off-key humming, and given your track record, maybe keep the concert short. Of course you crave upgrades. Modern, you want leather gauntlets, a zippered veil, maybe air conditioning. But the beekeeper gives you a look that says less is more when your neighbours are easily offended. And he's right. Linen breathes, straw breathes. Heavy armour would trap heat, thump against the skep, and declare war with every movement. Your current look says, I come in peace and am lightly compostable. You can't help rating the aesthetics. On a scale of 1 to knight in polished plate, you are a solid festival scarecrow with a side of herb garden. Joke 1. If you were a scarecrow, you'd apply for a transfer to a quiet oat field, less chance of being heckled by insects with a union. Joke 2. If the village ever hosts a masquerade, you're already dressed as anonymously itchy. Joke 3 arrives as you brush a stray sprig of sage from your collar. Somewhere a cook is furious you've stolen garnish for your head. Fashion aside, you test the edge cases. Can the helmet keep out a determined bee? Mostly. The weave deflects, the gaps confuse, and the overall silhouette interrupts their landing logic. But if you tilt just wrong, a worker might find a tiny doorway. The solution is vigilance. Keep the rim snug, the veil tucked, the motion smooth. UVR already learned that bees navigate by smell and vibration. The helmet modulates both, trapping some of your breath, muffling your hair's scent, turning your head into a less interesting hill rather than a flower-scented threat. You remember the flower dusting trick for swarms and laugh low in your throat at the image. White speckled clouds, white speckled keepers, a scene that looks like bakery day in the sky. If flower can mark ownership, it can also highlight the weak points of your outfit. Any patchy spot becomes a flower magnet. After a long day, you might resemble a lopsided loaf. You resist the urge to lick a fingertip. Not everything dusted is sugar. The beekeeper tugs your cuff and points to his boots. Soft leather, not heavy clogs. He taps a toe against the ground. Quiet, quiet. Another mainstream fact slips into place. A good portion of protection is really about not startling the neighbors. Loud footfalls, jangling belts, flapping hems. These are hazards disguised as clothing choices. You tie your belt cord tighter and imagine a medieval wardrobe guide that just says, "Does it swish? No? Approved." There's a ceremonial undertone you can't ignore. The outfit makes you feel assigned, not elevated like a knight, but set apart like a caretaker. The helmet, weird as it looks, signals intention to the village. You're the one who will risk a sting so the candles can burn on winter nights. That's a quiet kind of status. And yet historians still argue whether beekeepers formed distinct guilds with special privileges or simply slotted into broader agricultural roles. Some towns list wax sellers in market roles, others barely mention keepers at all. The record buzzes but doesn't always resolve. You catch a breeze and feel the helmet resist, then settle. It has the personality of a well-meaning hat that sometimes forgets it is, in fact, a hat. You steady it with a palm and continue between the hives, past the place where you practiced weaving, past the cottage with milk and honey from earlier, past the memory of that first sting that rewrote your expectations about pain and patience. The outfit doesn't promise invincibility. It promises enough comfort to stay calm long enough to make wise choices. It is, you realize, a meditation bell you happen to wear. When your thoughts race, it jabs your forehead. When you move too fast, it creaks. When you breathe too sharply, it traps and warms the exhale, reminding you to slow down. The suit's greatest feature is the way it keeps score on your nervousness and asks you gently to try again with less panic. Somewhere a monk would approve. You pass a skep where a few foragers return heavy with nectar. Their legs carry bright pollen baskets, tiny saddlebags in yellows and oranges. The sight softens everything. Fashion fails? Perhaps. But you're dressed correctly for the conversation. The bees don't care about sleek lines or matching tones. They care that you don't slam the door to their house and that you know when to whisper. Your ensemble, clumsy and homespun, communicates exactly that. As twilight presses a little lavender into the sky, you adjust your collar, tighten your wrist cords, and accept that you are both protected and slightly ridiculous. It's an honest place to be. The village will get honey and wax. You will get a few stings, a lot of stories, and the enduring knowledge that elegance is overrated when cooperation is the goal. Scarecrow or soldier, you're doing the work. And in the end, the bees keep their own score. Calm visit, calm response, frantic visit, frantic reply. Tonight your straw says calm. The evening bells echo faintly from the village church, but your attention is on the monks across the meadow. Their hoods hang low, their sandals crunch softly, and yet their voices rise in chants that seem to blend with the drone of bees. You hadn't noticed before how the rhythm of the hives mirrors human prayer, steady, layered, soothing, but also unyielding. It's here that you begin to understand why bees were not just livestock, but messengers of the divine. The mainstream fact, throughout the medieval Christian world, bees were seen as sacred symbols of purity and industry. Their wax, free of soot when burned, was considered the only acceptable substance for church candles. A single abbey might maintain dozens of skeps, all devoted not to table sugar, but to holy light. You imagine the abbots pacing, counting combs, their eyes less on honey and more on the endless cycle of liturgy. The quirky tidbit: some monastic texts claim bees never reproduce through base means but by immaculate methods, spontaneously or even from the bodies of oxen left in fields. The logic is dubious, the symbolism clear. Bees were thought too pure to be sullied by ordinary reproduction. You grin behind your straw helmet. If only medieval biology had YouTube to clear things up with a cheerful, "Actually, that's not how it works." Historians still argue whether early church doctrine deliberately shaped these myths to promote bees as sacred creatures, or whether popular folklore about their mysterious habits drifted into theology over centuries. Either way, you stand here in the meadow, helmet itching, listening to monks chant while bees weave their own hymns overhead, and you can't help thinking the overlap is intentional. The beekeeper gestures for you to follow toward the abbey's apiary. Here, the skeps are arranged more orderly, almost militarily, as if each is a monk in a straw cell. The air smells sharper, waxier, tinged with incense drifting from the chapel. You pull your helmet tighter and step into the rows, feeling as though you're intruding on a cloister where the monks just happen to have wings. You notice how monks move differently than villagers. They don't hurry, don't flap their sleeves. They fold their hands before the skeps, sometimes even murmuring blessings before lifting a comb. It feels ceremonial. You mimic their slowness, bowing your head slightly as if acknowledging both insect and saint. The helmet creaks like a pew bench, and you wonder if that counts as joining the hymn. One brother explains, half by gesture, half by Latin words you barely follow, that bees represent the Virgin Mary in their chastity, Christ in their sweetness, and the Church in their collective unity. That's a lot of symbolism for a buzzing insect, but as you stand there, the hum in your ears feels strangely liturgical, like an organ note that refuses to end. Of course, humour insists on sneaking in. You imagine confessing your sins not to a priest but to a hive, whispering through your straw helmet while thousands of tiny insects buzz judgment. "Forgive me, bees, for I ate too much honey at supper." The absurdity almost makes you laugh, but the monks look serious, so you stifle it into a muffled cough. The abbey candles burn brighter than any cottage taper you've seen. They give off a steady, pure flame, no flicker, no smoke, illuminating manuscripts with golden steadiness. You realize how vital wax is here, not just for ceremonies, but for knowledge itself. Without bees, monks couldn't copy books late into the night, couldn't preserve the words that future centuries will call history. Your ridiculous helmet suddenly feels like a scholar's tool, an accessory to literacy. Who knew straw could help save Aristotle? You walk further, hearing stories whispered of saints who kept hives, of hagiographies that praise bees for obedience and diligence. A monk even tells you that in some places, swarms settling on church walls were seen as divine omens. You tilt your head upward, half hoping a swarm descends just for you, but also aware that being buried under 20,000 bees is hardly restful. Still, the thought lingers. Maybe medieval villagers felt heaven was humming just above their heads. Historians still argue whether the devotion to bees was universal across Christendom or more localized to monasteries with abundant fields. Some documents exalt bees as near mystical, others barely mention them. You decide it doesn't matter. The chants, the candles, and the constant hum convince you that in this abbey, bees are gospel. The sun dips further, shadows stretching across the fields. Monks finish their chants, bees settle into their skeps, and you stand in the quiet overlap between religion and agriculture. Your helmet itches more than ever, straw pricking your temples, but you feel oddly reverent. This dome of straw has turned you from clownish scarecrow into accidental pilgrim, humming along with a choir that never sleeps. The monks file back toward their stone chapel, and you follow the beekeeper into the village proper, where another kind of devotion reveals itself, not to theology but to candlelight. You notice how every doorway, every tavern, every cottage corner glows with the pale amber of beeswax candles. The smell is unmistakable, faintly floral, clean, a little like honey without the stickiness. You inhale through the straw of your helmet and catch only a muted whiff, but enough to make you understand why this wax was prized above all other lights. The mainstream fact: in medieval Europe, beeswax candles were superior to tallow candles made from animal fat. They burned longer, cleaner, and without the acrid smoke that choked chapels and blackened ceilings. For churches, beeswax wasn't optional. It was mandated, considered fitting for holy places. That demand meant every skep in the village was part of a vast supply chain for divine illumination. The quirky tidbit: some guilds of candle makers insisted that only virgin wax could be used for certain services. Wax never blended with scraps or impurities. The terminology wasn't just pious marketing, it reinforced the idea that the product of bees carried a purity beyond what humans could concoct. You imagine the guildmasters solemnly inspecting lumps of wax, deciding which were fit for cathedral altars and which were destined for someone's slightly smelly kitchen. Historians still argue whether wax production for the church drained resources from ordinary villagers, leaving them in smoky gloom while monasteries glowed. Some records suggest peasants rarely saw beeswax candles outside of festivals, surviving instead on tallow dips that sputtered and stank. Other evidence hints at smaller-scale local trade, where even humble households might splurge on a beeswax taper for weddings or winter feasts. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the shifting middle. You step into the parish church itself, helmet bobbing awkwardly. The space is dim except for the soft blaze of beeswax candles on the altar. The flames don't flicker so much as steady themselves, like patient sentries. You feel the air warmed by their presence, not overheated but gently embracing, as if the building itself is exhaling peace. You can almost forget that outside, hives bristle with stings and risks. In here, those dangers have melted into light. The beekeeper points to a side table where wax is being rendered. Chunks of comb float in a pot, the air rich with a sweet, resinous smell. You watch as the hot liquid is poured into moulds, slender tapers lined up in neat rows. A boy turns the wicks with practiced flicks, ensuring they dry evenly. The process feels halfway between chemistry and liturgy. Your straw helmet steams faintly from the warmth, and you wonder if the bees would recognize their labor in this transformation. A woman in the corner polishes finished candles with a cloth, buffing them until they shine like gold rods. You imagine carrying a bundle to market, their smooth surfaces catching the sun, a gleam worth as much as silver. In some regions, wax was literally used as rent paid to lords or monasteries in lieu of coin. You think of peasants trudging uphill with heavy sacks of candles, mumbling about how their heads could use a helmet too. Your mind drifts to domestic scenes. Picture a small cottage in deep winter. Outside, wind claws at the shutters, snow buries the fields, and wolves howl in the dark forest. Inside, a single beeswax candle burns steadily on the table, casting soft light on the family huddled around it. Its glow touches faces, warms bread, stretches the night just enough for stories or prayers. The helmet on your head suddenly feels less ridiculous. It is part of this chain that turns buzzing wings into comfort on the darkest nights. Joke 1. You think of the irony that beeswax is clean burning, while your sweaty helmet smells like a bonfire in a haystack. If anyone lights you by mistake, you'll be the village's least dignified candle. Joke 2. You imagine bees attending church, wings folded reverently, complaining that their wax is being squandered on late-night manuscript copying instead of proper hive decor. Joke 3. You mutter to yourself that if medieval Tinder existed, a candlemaker's profile would read, "Tall, steady, burns clean, smells great." Outside again, the twilight deepens. Villagers carry bundles of candles home, some for markets, some for services, some for their own tables. You see how wax becomes wealth, how light itself is currency. And yet behind it all lies your itchy, straw-covered head, proof that before a candle could flicker in a chapel, someone had to stand patiently in a field, enduring stings, weaving skeps, and whispering to bees. Historians still argue whether this candle economy enriched the keepers themselves or merely funneled profit upward. Were beekeepers respected craftsmen or anonymous labourers invisible behind straw helmets? You suspect both. Tonight, as shadows lengthen and candles glow, you walk with your helmet creaking, half burden, half crown, feeling oddly luminous yourself. The bells fade, and you trail behind the beekeeper into the hum of village life. Candles and honey may shape the economy, but the hands tending the hives aren't always the ones written into the records. You notice women moving between gardens and skeps, balancing baskets of herbs with the same ease as lifting lids from hives. Their gestures are calm, practiced, quiet caretakers of buzzing colonies. And yet, you know that the scrolls, charters and guild lists seldom mention their names. The mainstream fact, in many rural communities, women played a central role in beekeeping, especially when it came to daily maintenance. Records from late medieval England note widows inheriting hives as part of household property. Some even managed their honey sales directly at markets. But when chroniclers praised the beekeeper, the default image was male. You tilt your straw helmet forward, acknowledging the silent workforce hidden in the shadows of parchment. The quirky tidbit. A few folk tales claimed bees would only thrive if they were spoken to in a woman's voice. Some villages believed hives should be tended by wives, widows, or daughters whose tones supposedly soothed the bees. You picture yourself testing this theory, helmet on, voice pitched high, trying not to sound like a falsetto monk. The bees would probably judge the performance harshly. Historians still argue whether the underdocumentation of women beekeepers means their role was truly secondary, or whether chroniclers simply overlooked what everyone in the village already knew. Some scholars suspect women controlled significant portions of local honey trade, especially in small markets. Others argue that the patriarchal structure of guilds and taxes obscured female contributions. You find yourself agreeing with the buzzing logic around you. Just because it wasn't written down doesn't mean it didn't hum loudly in daily life. You pass one cottage where a woman in a patched tunic tends skeps lined neatly under a lean-to. She moves with steady patience, humming a soft tune. The bees flow around her as if recognizing a familiar vibration. She lifts a comb, honey glistening in the low light, and calls to her son to fetch a pot. He rushes forward, eyes wide with pride. It is a family trade passed down not through guild contracts, but through practice and memory. You step closer, straw helmet itching at your brow, and she glances at you, amused. Perhaps she wonders why you need such an awkward dome while she works bareheaded, trusting smoke and skill alone. You mutter something about being new at this. She smiles, pours honey into a clay jar, and hands you a taste. It coats your tongue in gold, thicker than anything sold at market, sweeter than anything a monastery might hoard. This is household honey, unmeasured, unrecorded, but deeply sustaining. A funny thought strikes you. Imagine the official tax collector arriving, demanding honey rent, only to be told, "Oh, sorry, the bees preferred my voice, so technically this batch belongs to me." Bureaucrats would buzz with irritation long before the hives did. Joke 1 logged. Joke 2, you picture a medieval dating profile again. Can tend hives without helmet, sings to bees, fluent in pollen. Suddenly, the straw hat on your head feels like an amateur's badge. Joke 3 arrives when you imagine future historians debating your existence. There is no evidence Samra, the straw-helmeted beekeeper, ever made honey, they'll argue, ignoring the smear of golden stickiness still clinging to your chin. You wander further and notice how gender roles shape not just who tends hives, but who benefits. Men bring wax to guild halls, monks weigh out honey for trade, but women keep bees alive day to day, smoke curling from their hearths, combs dripping in kitchens. You realize the buzzing economy runs on invisible work, much like your helmet, awkward but essential. Historians still argue whether women's contributions extended to innovation. Were they the ones weaving tweaks into skeps, tucking herbs into coils, experimenting with calming songs? The parchment is silent, but the hum in the air feels like an answer. Bees don't care who tends them, so long as hands are steady and voices kind. As you leave the cottage, you glance back at the woman still humming, bees circling her like a crown. You feel oddly humbled. Your straw helmet, so scratchy and self-important, pales next to her unarmored confidence. It makes you think maybe the real protection isn't straw or smoke, but the quiet rhythm of daily care, the invisible, unrecorded hands that keep the hive alive. You wake with the dawn, straw helmet still itching faintly from yesterday's work, and the beekeeper beckons you toward his cottage. Inside, the air smells of wax and parchment, a blend of field and study. On the rough wooden table lie several sheets of vellum, browned with age, the ink faint but legible if you squint. He spreads them out carefully, as though unveiling treasure, and in a way they are. These are medieval beekeeping manuals, the rare written attempts to pin down a craft usually taught by gesture, imitation, and whispers across garden fences. The mainstream fact, one of the most famous texts of the Middle Ages, the Geoponica, a Byzantine agricultural handbook compiled in the 10th century, contained advice on bees, how to manage skeps, how to prevent swarming, even how to soothe colonies. Later, in Western Europe, writers like Thomas of Cantimpré and Bartholomeus Anglicus sprinkled bee lore into encyclopedias. By the 14th century, scattered manuscripts offered practical, if sometimes fanciful, tips for keeping hives alive. The quirky tidbit. Some of these texts recommended utterly bizarre remedies for angry colonies, sprinkling them with holy water, blowing trumpets near the hives, or even reciting poetry. One Italian manual suggested bees could be persuaded to stay if the keeper sang psalms while circling the hive 3 times. You picture yourself marching in dizzy loops, helmet wobbling, half monk, half parade float, trying to keep a straight face as the bees judge your singing voice. Historians still argue whether these manuals reflected widespread practice or were more symbolic, written for wealthy landowners who wanted a touch of rustic prestige without ever actually donning a straw helmet. Were these pages instructional, or were they more like medieval coffee table books, filled with charming trivia rather than actionable steps? The debate buzzes on, much like the bees themselves. The beekeeper pushes one manuscript toward you, a drawing of a figure in what might be your own straw headgear. The lines are crude, the proportions off, but you recognize the familiar dome and veil. You lean closer, tracing the ink with a fingertip, and wonder if some scribe centuries ago chuckled just as you do now at the absurd silhouette. The helmet has always looked ridiculous and always been necessary. You attempt to read a passage aloud, your voice muffled by straw. It speaks of choosing hive locations, avoiding damp valleys, and keeping hives away from noisy roads. You chuckle at that last bit, imagining medieval highways teeming with ox carts and gossiping peddlers. Apparently, bees need peace as much as monks. Beside the parchment, the beekeeper places small jars filled with crushed herbs. He gestures to the text where remedies are listed: thyme for calming, fennel to attract swarms, mint to deter pests. You lift one jar to your nose. The scent leaks faintly into your helmet, refreshing but a little overwhelming. For a moment you feel less like a beekeeper and more like a medieval apothecary. The manuals also carry a certain poetry. They describe bees as children of the sun, wax as the earth's tears, honey as the blood of flowers. You grin. Medieval writers couldn't resist a flourish, even in practical guides. Imagine if your modern instruction manuals read like that. Insert tab A into slot B, lest the furniture spirits take offense. Joke 1. Medieval IKEA, sponsored by bees. Joke 2. You imagine monks writing marginal notes next to bee diagrams. Brother Thomas tried this and was stung 47 times. Proceed with caution. Joke 3 arrives as you notice one passage suggesting bees will thrive if their keeper avoids excessive melancholy. You laugh softly. Apparently, even in the 13th century, bees preferred an upbeat work environment. You make a mental note to smile more, even while sweating in straw. The beekeeper shows you how parchment was sometimes smeared with wax to preserve it, giving the manuals a faint sheen. You realize with a start that bees didn't just provide the subject matter, they provided the medium itself. Knowledge about bees was literally written on the product of bees. There's a beautiful symmetry in that, one you tuck away as the candles flicker. Historians still argue whether literacy spread much practical innovation into villages, or whether most beekeeping wisdom remained oral. The truth likely blends. Monks preserved knowledge in Latin, peasants preserved it in practice, and the hum of hives carried between both worlds. You sit there, straw helmet heavy on your head, suddenly aware you're part of that continuum, learning through both parchment and patience. As dawn brightens, you leave the cottage with a scrap of wax-sealed parchment in your hand, the words barely legible but the message clear. Beekeeping is equal parts craft, ritual, and mystery. Your helmet scratches, your arms sting faintly from yesterday's hazes. But your mind buzzes with the realization that people have always tried to tame bees, not just with tools, but with words. You tuck the fragment of parchment into your tunic and step back outside, helmet scratching your scalp as if to remind you that books are fine, but bees write their own instructions in the air. The hives hum, and with them comes a swirl of stories that no manuscript ever quite explains. Quirky bits of lore, half-serious traditions, and the occasional outright nonsense that villagers swore by. The mainstream fact: beekeeping has always carried folklore alongside practicality. In medieval Europe, it was common belief that bees could sense their keeper's mood. If you were calm, they stayed calm. If you were angry, they matched it with stings. Today we call it pheromones and vibration. But back then it was read as proof that bees possessed souls. You shuffle closer, thinking maybe your straw helmet isn't just for protection, but also for hiding your nervous grin. The quirky tidbit: villagers claimed bees could be summoned, or at least pleased, by music. A fiddler at a wedding might coax a swarm to settle, or a keeper humming a hymn might calm a restless hive. But beware, sing off-key, and you might provoke them. You can't resist imagining a medieval Simon Cowell judging beekeepers. Terrible pitch. The hive says no. You clear your throat behind the straw, daring a hum, and quickly stop when a nearby worker buzzes a little too close, perhaps critiquing your melody. Historians still argue whether such stories were meant as literal instructions or moral parables. Did people genuinely circle hives with instruments, or were they explaining the mystery of bee behavior through metaphor? Some accounts describe keepers banging pots and drums to drive bees into new skeps, but whether the sound soothed or merely startled them into retreat remains unresolved. As you wander between the skeps, you overhear a woman telling her child that bees must be told of every major family event. Births, deaths, weddings, all shared with the hive in whispers, or else the colony might sicken or fly away. You picture yourself leaning close, helmet pressed awkwardly against straw walls, murmuring, "By the way, my cousin got married." The bees buzz in reply, perhaps congratulatory, perhaps just irritated at your helmet scraping their doorway. Joke 1. You imagine turning up late to a funeral and realizing no one told the bees yet. You'd sprint to the hives breathless, still in mourning clothes, whispering, "Sorry for the delay," and probably trip on your own tunic cord. Joke 2. If bees truly understood gossip, they'd be the best medieval news service, delivering reports from hive to hive. Did you hear? The miller's daughter eloped. Buzz buzz, pass it on. Joke 3. You wonder whether the bees ever got tired of constant updates. Oh great, another wedding announcement. Can we get back to foraging now? The beekeeper gestures toward a hive where the hum deepens, steady and resonant. He nods as if to say, "They're listening." You lean closer, half believing it. The sound envelops you, filling your chest with vibrations, like a choir rehearsing underground. For a moment, you feel less like a keeper and more like a guest, someone who owes respect. You recall the old belief that a swarm landing on your house was a blessing, but one departing unexpectedly was a curse. Villagers sometimes chase swarms with pots, bells, or even prayer, desperate to keep fortune from flying off. One tale claims bees would leave if their keeper told lies, as though they were moral auditors buzzing with judgment. You can't help squirming in your helmet, wondering if they've overheard your more sarcastic thoughts. Historians still argue whether these customs were vestiges of pre-Christian animism or simply practical metaphors dressed in folklore. Whatever their origin, they stitched meaning into daily labor, whispering to hives, singing to bees, even scolding them. It gave villagers a sense of dialogue with nature. And maybe, just maybe, the bees listened. As twilight settles, you squat beside a skep, your straw helmet brushing against tall grass, and hum softly again. This time, you choose a simple tune, low and steady, as if joining the evening prayer you heard at the abbey. The bees hum back, their wings thrumming in the same key, and you feel a strange harmony. It's not proof, not science, but it's soothing. You lean back, helmet creaking, and decide folklore isn't foolishness. It's another kind of manual, unwritten, yet whispered in every hive's shadow. And tonight, as you drift in the meadow, you realize you've become part of that lore yourself. The clumsy, straw-helmeted beekeeper who dared to hum with the bees. You follow the smell of boiled herbs toward a low cottage where steam beads on the window lattice. Inside, the air is warm and sweet. Honeyed air, thick enough that your straw helmet seems to drink it in before you do. An apothecary beckons you closer, points at a mortar, and gestures for you to sit. The bench creaks, your helmet scratches, and a clay cup presses into your hands, syrupy, golden, with the faintest tang of vinegar and thyme. You sip, and the sweetness slides down your throat like a velvet scarf. The apothecary nods. There, medicine. The mainstream fact lands as smoothly as the drink. Medieval healers used honey constantly in wound dressings, cough syrups, digestive electuaries, because honey keeps out moisture-loving microbes and when diluted can release a little hydrogen peroxide. They didn't call it that, of course. They called it virtue. But it worked often enough for word to spread from monastery infirmaries to village hearths. If you cut your hand gathering straw, someone would lay on a cloth spread with honey and crushed herbs, tie it gently with linen, and tell you to be patient. You feel that cool, tacky bandage in imagination, and your skin seems to relax under its phantom touch. A quirky tidbit swims up from the apothecary's shelf labels. Oxymel, honey mixed with vinegar, prescribed for coughs and thickened humours. There's also hydromel, honey and water, gentler, sipped warm for sore throats. Some recipes add rue, fennel, or ground pepper, the last of which makes your nose prickle behind the helmet. The apothecary laughs at your sneeze and sets a pot to simmer, telling you that singers and monks who chanted long hours favoured honey infusions to keep their voices smooth. You picture a row of hooded brothers all secretly on Team Honey Tea and try not to giggle. Finally, a medieval wellness trend you can get behind. Historians still argue ether honey's success in medieval medicine came from its intrinsic antimicrobial properties or from the simple fact that a clean, sealed dressing, changed with care, will beat dirt and guesswork any day. They also debate whether the era's most famous panacea, theriac, a many-ingredient paste bound with honey, was genuinely therapeutic or just the world's most expensive jam. Either way, you can see how honey's sweetness helped the medicine go down, turning bitter roots and awkward powders into something a patient might actually swallow. The apothecary lifts a linen bundle and carefully unwraps a small ulcer dressing to show you the gleam beneath. Honey catches the light, amber and calm, holding the herbs in place the way a hive holds its brood, close, protected, warm. You remember the steady glow of beeswax candles in the church and realize light and healing are siblings here, both born of bees, both spread with patient hands. You're handed a second cup, thicker, spiced with cinnamon and a whisper of ginger, an electuary for cold stomach and wandering wind. You take a cautious sip and feel heat bloom behind your sternum. If dinner was rough bread and turnips, this would rescue your evening. Joke 1 rises like steam. You mentally rebrand this potion as medieval ginger honey latte and consider pitching it at the next fair with a chalkboard that reads, "Add extra humours for a penny." Across the table sits a jar of propolis. The resin bees collect and mix with wax. The apothecary scrapes a bit, crumbles it into warm wine, and says it's good for the mouth. Sore gums, little ulcers. You sniff, piney, resinous, like a forest pressed into a thimble. It tastes better than it smells, and you roll it around your tongue, imagining the hive's caulking turned into a human sealant. Joke 2 taps your shoulder. If you talk too long after this, your words might stick to your teeth in a respectable, church-approved way. There are stories too, drifting around the rafters. One claims honey can preserve a fruit for a year. Another insists a small fish sealed in honey won't spoil. Then the apothecary lowers his voice and mentions a stranger tale from far-off writings, a legend of mellified remains steeped in honey used as a cure. You choke slightly on your hydromel. The apothecary shrugs, says it's likely a traveller's fantasy, and you nod emphatically. Let's keep our medical pantry on the friendly side of bees, not the macabre. Historians still argue whether that tale reflects a garbled report or a moral fable about excess and credulity. Your stomach votes for fable. You run a finger along a list of recipes and see mead prescribed for cheer of the heart. Mead again, fermented honey, this time in careful doses, because too much cheer lands you face first in a hedgerow. A measured draught warms shivering bones after winter chores, lifts spirits in dark months, and, if we're honest, makes the straw helmet joke slightly funnier. The apothecary winks. You pretend not to understand. Another jar, honey infused with rose petals. The scent is summer hidden in glass, soft, floral, a lullaby of gardens. It's used for eye rinses, diluted, and for sore throats, and you can't help leaning closer. Behind your helmet slits, the world blurs pink. The apothecary cautions that eyes are fussy, and not all concoctions are wise. Even now, healers send for clearer waters, for boiled cloths. Historians still argue whether these perfumed waters did more harm or good, and your inner skeptic votes sometimes both, depending on how clean the tools were. Still, the rose note lingers, an aromatic promise that medicine can be kind. The talk turns to fevers, honey with lemon, when lemons are available from distant ports. becomes a small storm of sunshine inside a cup. More often it's honey with apple cider or quince, simmered low. You recall the market's bright combs, the child with sticky fingers, and realize the same sweetness that coaxed a smile can also coax a weary body to sip, to swallow, to rest. There's medicine in that compliance alone. A patient who will drink is a patient who might recover. You ask, muffled by straw, about wounds too large for a village cupboard. The apothecary grows careful. No miracles, only diligence. Wash, honey, clean linen, patience. Replace the dressing, keep flies away, watch for heat that spreads. Bees can't fight every fate, but they lend their order to your chaos. You picture the hive, tidy, relentless, precise, and feel steadier. If you can copy a fraction of that discipline, you can carry someone through a dangerous week. Joke 3 perches on the rim of your cup. If the bees ever open a clinic, the waiting room will be very efficient. Everyone called in order by a gentle waggle. No shouting, no drafts, and a complimentary spoon of hydromel at the door. You'd sign up, helmet and all. Stepping outside, you taste the after-sweet on your lips and the evening's cool breath through straw. The meadow hums its ongoing prescription. Move slowly, keep distances, respect thresholds. You realize medicine here is not separate from daily life. It's brewed in kitchens, blessed in chapels, carried to bedsides in clay and cloth. And at every stage the bees have a hand or a wing in the cure. Historians still argue whether medieval reliance on honey waned as cane sugar crept into Europe and apothecaries found new solvents for bitter drugs. Perhaps it shifted, but the enduring recipes, oxymel, electuaries, poultices, outlast fashions. You too will keep a little jar at the ready, not because it's a miracle, but because it coaxes the body to calm and the mind to rest, and because nothing else tastes so exactly like sunlight you can swallow. As dusk unbuttons the sky, you raise your cup for a final sip. The sweetness settles every rough edge. The helmet's itch even seems to soften. You whisper, out of habit now, thanks to the hive. Then you head back across the grass, carrying the quiet conviction that sometimes the simplest medicines are the ones that linger longest. Warmth, patience, clean linen, and a spoon of honey given with a steady hand. You leave the apothecary's cottage with honey still on your tongue, and the beekeeper motions you toward a different sort of medicine, one that sings rather than soothes. A wooden mug sloshes into your hand, foam bubbling on top, golden and glinting in the fading light. You sniff, and the air rising through your straw helmet carries both sweetness and a sharp tang that pricks your nose. This is mead, the drink of kings and peasants alike, born of honey, water, and patient fermentation. The mainstream fact: mead is one of the oldest alcoholic drinks known to humankind. By the medieval period, it was common across Europe, though its popularity varied regionally. In monasteries, it stood alongside ale and wine as part of both daily diet and feast rituals. In villages, a jug of mead marked special occasions, weddings, or the successful harvest of honey. You raise the mug carefully, sip and taste sunlight turned to liquid courage. The quirky tidbit: some recipes infused mead with herbs and spices, cloves, rosemary, ginger, even pepper, turning it into what we might now call a cocktail. In parts of Wales, it was sometimes served warm, a sort of medieval mulled wine. You picture a tavern keeper stirring a steaming pot, helmet slipping over his eyes, and laughing villagers teasing him that even bees would blush at such extravagance. Historians still argue whether mead was more common than beer in Northern Europe, or whether it slowly declined as barley and hops became easier and cheaper to produce. Some claim mead lingered mostly in monastic cellars. Others suggest rural households brewed it in small batches whenever surplus honey allowed. The evidence is patchy, like a parchment blurred by spilled drink. You step into the tavern, where the beams smell of smoke and roasted meat, and the long tables shine with spilled wax. Tankards clink, voices roar, and laughter rolls like thunder. Mead here isn't just beverage, it's glue. It binds the villagers together, lets them forget the sting of bees and the weight of taxes. Your straw helmet draws amused glances, but no mockery. In a room warmed by mead, everyone wears some kind of ridiculous crown. The mug in your hand tastes different with each sip, first honey, then spice, then a faint sour edge that reminds you it was brewed in barrels not entirely trustworthy. Joke 1 forms immediately. You imagine a medieval sommelier swirling mead, inhaling deeply and pronouncing, "Ah yes," hints of clover, barn cat, and possibly yesterday's boots. Joke 2 arrives as you watch a villager lean too far, spill mead into his lap, and then proudly declare he's feeding the bees from within. You nearly choke on your drink, laughing into the straw. Joke 3 is your own guilty thought. With enough mugs of mead, the straw helmet might start to feel less like itchy protection and more like festival headwear. You catch yourself bobbing it slightly to the rhythm of a lute tune, and the villagers cheer as if you've invented a dance. The tavern keeper explains in a booming voice that mead is more than merriment. It's medicine for spirits. A bride and groom sip it on their wedding night for fertility. A farmer drinks it before sowing for good luck. A monk swears by it for digestive humours, though you suspect that's just holy justification. Everywhere, honey transforms from salve for wounds to salve for souls. The beekeeper beside you sips slowly, shaking his head at the rowdy crowd. You realize not everyone indulges freely. Too much mead, and the next morning brings throbbing penance. But even restraint is part of the ritual. 1 mug warms the bones, 2 mugs blur the sting of yesterday's hives, 3 mugs convince you the bees themselves are dancing in rhythm with the lute. You wisely stop at 2. Historians still argue whether the term honeymoon truly originated with mead, couples supposedly drinking it for a month after marriage to ensure fertility. Some claim it's a later romantic invention, others insist the tradition has roots deep in Germanic custom. You glance at the froth clinging to your mug and decide not to split hairs. After all, the word itself carries the right mixture of sweetness and longing. As the night deepens, you stagger outside, stars pricking the sky. Mead still warms your chest, the helmet muffling the cool air so it feels like a personal hearth. You think of the bees tucked in their hives, dreaming, if bees dream, of flowers, while their honey runs in mugs that fuel laughter, song, and union. The drink connects meadow to table, hive to hearth, sting to sigh. You tilt your head back, straw scratching, and let the constellations blur slightly. Somewhere between the apothecary's salves and the tavern's mugs, honey has become the bridge between pain and pleasure, work and rest, devotion and delight. You breathe slowly, smile faintly, and whisper a thank you to the hive for healing, for sweetness, and for this sleepy warmth curling you toward dreams. Morning breaks again, the kind of morning that smells like damp earth and frying onions drifting from cottage hearths. Your straw helmet feels heavier than usual. Maybe the aftertaste of last night's mead is still buzzing in your head. The beekeeper nudges you toward the market square, where today the hive's bounty takes on yet another form: trade. The square is alive with voices, braying animals, and the faint hum of bees clinging to scraps of comb still sticky with honey. The mainstream fact: medieval fairs and markets often included honey, beeswax, and related goods as major commodities. Honey was measured by weight, sold in clay jars, sometimes pressed into cakes of comb. Wax was rolled into balls or long sticks, ready for candle makers. Both were durable enough to travel by cart, making them staples of regional trade networks. You pass stalls lined with jars that glisten amber in the sunlight, each one a little treasure chest of sweetness. The quirky tidbit: some fairs judged honey quality not just by taste, but by clarity. A jar that caught the light like glass fetched higher price. Villagers sometimes strained honey through linen bags to remove stray bee parts, though occasionally a wing or leg slipped through. You imagine biting down on a chunk of bread only to find a crunchy surprise. You mutter through your helmet, "Protein upgrade," and chuckle at the thought. Historians still argue whether rural beekeepers profited much from these markets or whether middlemen, monks, merchants, guild officials, took the lion's share. Some records suggest peasants gained only modest coin, enough for small luxuries, while institutional buyers moved wax in bulk for serious wealth. The truth is blurred, like honey drifting slowly in sunlight. You wander among the stalls, straw helmet brushing against hanging cloths, as vendors call out their wares: jars of wildflower honey, coals, endles twisted into braids, even wax figurines of saints. One man hawks beeswax polish for boots and armor, another sells wax tablets for writing. Children hover nearby, hoping for a sticky fingerful. The beekeeper slaps a boy's hand away gently. Honey is coin, not candy, at least until the jars are sold. At one corner, a woman bargains fiercely with a trader. She presses him about the weight of his jar, insists he dipped too deep a spoon in, and threatens to take her business elsewhere. You hear bees buzzing faintly from her basket. She must have just come from her own hives. Her authority rings out across the square, and you can't help grinning. She sounds more formidable than half the guild masters. You stop at a stall of wax candles, their surfaces glossy, catching sunlight in clean reflections. The vendor lets you sniff one, faintly floral, faintly honeyed, not rancid like tallow. He brags that his candles burn for hours without smoke. You nod, remembering last night's tavern haze, and almost reach for your coin purse. But the beekeeper reminds you, the price is steep, better to make your own if you can. Humour drips into your thoughts like honey from comb. Joke 1. You imagine a medieval version of a farmer's market influencer snapping sketches instead of photos, scribbling captions like "Today's wax aesthetic, rustic chic." Joke 2. You notice bees landing on an open jar, happily reclaiming their lost honey. You think, that's not theft, it's a refund. Joke 3. You try to picture yourself haggling over a jar while wearing your absurd straw helmet. Every argument muffled, every glare softened. You'd lose the deal instantly, sounding like a disgruntled basket. Past the honey and wax stalls, you see signs of how deep bees run in the economy. Scribes buy wax for tablets, soldiers for bowstring wax, priests for candles, cooks for glaze. This single insect fuels half the village trades, buzzing silently beneath the clamour of coins. You realise bees are not just insects here, they are an invisible guild, their membership paid in sweetness. Historians still argue whether this reliance created shortages, especially in years of poor flowering or harsh winters. Did entire towns dim without wax? Did honey prices spike beyond reach? Records show fluctuations, but not enough detail to settle the matter. What's certain is that the market's bustle proves bees were worth every ounce of straw you balance on your head. As the day fades, you leave the market square, jars clinking at your side. The helmet scratches, the straps pull, but you feel oddly proud. You are part of this trade, however small, guardian of sweetness, bearer of wax, slightly ridiculous scarecrow in the crowd. And as villagers light candles at dusk, as bread glistens with glaze, you know the market's hum is just another echo of the hive itself. The square empties as dusk thickens, and your straw helmet tilts a little to the side, heavy with the day's dust and the faint sweetness of spilled honey. The beekeeper beckons you along a narrow path that leads not to cottages or fields this time, but to a stone outbuilding you hadn't noticed before. Its door is thick and iron-banded, and inside hangs the chill of judgment. Here you realize bees serve purposes far stranger than candles or sweeteners. Tonight you learn of punishments. The mainstream fact: medieval justice was a patchwork of creativity and cruelty. Punishments varied from stocks to fines, but in some towns bees were occasionally weaponized. Criminals might be forced to run through swarms or hives placed near pillories so that stings added humiliation to shame. It wasn't common everywhere, but where it happened, it left a sting in local memory as sharp as any verdict. The quirky tidbit: one record whispers of a thief being locked in a room with overturned skeps. The buzzing itself, before any stings, was said to terrify him into confession. Bees became a psychological cudgel, a humming chorus of "don't do it again." You shiver behind your straw helmet, imagining the claustrophobic noise, the crawling touch of wings against skin, the prick of stingers you couldn't swat away. Historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated, symbolic tales meant to warn rather than describe literal practices. Some think bees as punishment were more folkloric than judicial. Others insist records from rural courts prove that hives were indeed weaponized. Either way, the stories persist, buzzing between lore and legend. You peer into the chamber. A broken skep lies in the corner, its straw brittle with age. Was it a tool for gathering honey or a prop in some grim punishment? The line blurs uncomfortably. The beekeeper shrugs as if to say, both. Bees serve as teachers as much as suppliers. Their sting is both lesson and loss. Outside again, you hear villagers retelling stories of justice by hive. A boy laughs as he repeats how once a drunk who insulted the reeve was made to sit in the stocks while hives were placed nearby. The laughter fades when he admits the man nearly died of swelling. You realize bees can be instruments of mercy or menace depending on human whim. Humor creeps in, as it always does. Joke 1. You picture a medieval courtroom where the judge bangs not a gavel, but a buzzing hive. Order, or else you'll really feel it. Joke 2. Imagine a lawyer trying to defend a client. My lord, my client is allergic. Perhaps tallow candles instead. Joke 3. You picture a petty thief weighing his options. Steal a loaf of bread, face the bees, or just stay hungry. Honestly, medieval diets were grim enough. Hunger might win. The beekeeper nudges you toward a different thought. He gestures at the hive entrance where a few bees hover even at night. They protect their home tirelessly, punishing intruders not because of law, but because of instinct. Humans, he seems to suggest, only borrowed that instinct and dressed it in legal robes. You nod, feeling the weight of it. Historians still argue whether punishments like this were barbaric exceptions or part of everyday rural justice. To modern ears they sound harsh, even grotesque. But in a world where prisons were rare and resources scarce, punishment had to be immediate, visible, memorable. And what could be more memorable than running screaming through a swarm, helmetless, praying for mercy from insects? You walk away slowly, helmet brushing low branches, and the night's quiet hum feels heavier now. Bees are not cruel, you remind yourself. They are protective. It's humans who twisted their sting into spectacle. Still, the lesson lingers. The same creatures that gave wax for worship and honey for healing could, in the wrong hands, become enforcers of shame. As you trudge back to the village square, the glow of candles softens the mood. Children laugh, couples share bread, monks murmur prayers. Yet somewhere in the dark, you hear a sharper buzz, and you wonder if it's just the meadow or the echo of punishment tales meant to scare everyone into honesty. Your straw helmet feels suddenly lighter, less absurd, better to endure its itch than to face the hive bare. The night has passed and dawn stretches thin and silver over the meadow. Your straw helmet is damp with dew, smelling faintly like wet hay left in a barn. The beekeeper gestures for you to follow him again, this time not to markets or taverns, but toward a small hut where a few scholars in long robes sit hunched over scrolls. Their table is littered with wax tablets, quills, and ink pots. The conversation you overhear is not about honey trade or candle prices. It's about bees themselves. Welcome to the strange world of medieval science. The mainstream fact: medieval scholars debated endlessly about how bees reproduced. Aristotle had suggested they were ruled by a king bee, though he'd never quite figured out the queen's role. Later thinkers disagreed. Some believed bees sprang spontaneously from dead animals, often oxen, what we'd call the Bugonia myth. Others argued they arose from dew, from air, even from the mixing of flowers. You tilt your helmet, amused, wondering how such theories survived when actual hives buzzed in every village. But then again, observing bees closely meant risking stings, and parchment is safer than swarms. The quirky tidbit: some writers claimed bees never engaged in base reproduction at all. Instead, they created new life through the fragrance of blossoms or by gathering the breath of spring. One chronicler poetically insisted bees were chaste children of the sun. You chuckle in your helmet, imagining monks scribbling solemnly that bees basically photosynthesized. If only biology could be that tidy. Historians still argue whether these debates were symbolic more than scientific. Was the claim of bees' chastity a metaphor designed to align them with virtues of purity and labor? Or were scholars genuinely convinced that hives were miracle engines exempt from the messy realities of flesh? The answer, like much of medieval science, lies in a blur of observation, faith, and imagination. You kneel to watch a hive as a scholar drones on about royal hierarchies. He insists a king rules the colony, not a queen. Yet before your eyes, a larger bee, queenly by every standard, moves slowly through the comb, attended by workers. You glance up at him, wanting to shout through your straw helmet, "Open your eyes, friend!" But you stay quiet. You've already learned that arguing with scholars rarely changes their tune. Joke 1 floats in. Imagine medieval gender debates spilling into the hive. Clearly it's a king. No, a queen. Meanwhile, the bees roll their compound eyes and get back to work, unconcerned with titles. Joke 2. You picture Aristotle himself trying to observe bees up close, stung on the nose, and then storming off, muttering, "Fine, they're kings. I'm not checking again." Joke 3. You imagine a lecture where a scholar insists bees are born from ox carcasses, only for a farmer in the back to raise a hand and say, "Funny, mine came from a field of clover." The beekeeper shows you his own method of science. He places a glass jar, rare, precious, over part of the hive to let you peek inside. Through the distortions, you see larvae, comb, the bustling of nurses feeding the young. No parchment needed, no grand theory, just straw hats and patience. You realize medieval science had two faces: the scholarly, full of metaphors and mistaken kings, and the practical, learned in fields by those with itchy helmets. Historians still argue whether this divide was as stark as it seems. Some manuscripts hint that monks combined practical observation with theory, while peasants occasionally adopted scholarly terms like king bee in their own talk. Knowledge flowed both ways, even if unevenly. Still, the helmet on your head feels like the more honest laboratory, scratched, sweaty, but grounded in buzzing reality. The scholars continue debating, one quoting Aristotle, another citing Virgil, a third muttering about spontaneous generation. You drift away, straw helmet creaking, preferring the hum of the hive to the hum of voices. Bees may sting, but at least they don't insist on dead oxen myths while the queen strolls plainly before them. As the sun rises higher, the meadow glitters with dew, and you feel oddly satisfied. You may not solve the mystery of bee reproduction tonight, but you've seen enough to know the hive writes its own lessons if you're patient enough to watch. Science, you think, is sometimes just a matter of wearing the straw, taking the sting, and letting the bees themselves do the lecturing. You wake to air that tastes like iron, frost rims the hedge, the grass crunches like stale bread under your boots, and the straw helmet tightens a little as if it too is bracing for winter. The meadow that once rang with high summer hum now speaks in whispers, just a few bees nosing the cold, then retreating, sensible as elders who know when to call it an evening. You pull your cloak closer, feel the helmet prickle along your forehead, and follow the beekeeper to the hives for the season's slowest work, keeping the living heat alive until flowers return. Your hands learn a new choreography. Instead of lifting lids and teasing combs, you wrap the skeps with straw mats, long plaited bands that cinch around the domes like belts on sleeping travellers. The mainstream fact: medieval keepers often wintered skeps in shelters or against warm walls, packing straw, fern or bracken around them and narrowing the entrance to a mouse-wide slit. Some villages built bee bowls, stone alcoves set into south-facing walls, to hold the skeps off damp ground and out of the wind. You slide a skep into such a niche now, where the sun, when it shows, will stroke it like a modest blessing. Inside the hive, life condenses. The bees form a tight cluster around their queen, vibrating their flight muscles to make heat, inching as a collective from one comb to the next so they can sip stored honey without breaking formation. You place your ear to the straw and hear that winter note, lower, steadier, like a kettle barely thinking about steam. It's hypnotic, a lullaby you didn't know you needed. The helmet dampens outside noise, and for a moment you're listening through woven field to a city of warmth you're not allowed to enter. Condensation becomes your new enemy. Warm breath from the cluster hits the cold straw and wants to rain back down. A winter drizzle inside a tiny house. You loosen the wrap. Pings at the crown just enough to let moisture escape. Too tight, and they'll drown in their own breath. Too loose, and the wind will rake them. You recall the apothecary's jars and the steady flame of beeswax. Winter care has the same recipe, not too much, not too little, just enough. It's the porridge of survival. A quirky tidbit drifts up from the beekeeper's memory. On 12th night, some households wassail the bees, carrying warm, spiced ale or mead to the hives, tapping the straw and singing to wish them good fortune. A morsel of cake might be tucked near the entrance, as if the hive celebrates with everyone else. You can picture it in the blue dark evening, neighbours in cloaks, breath smoking, mugs lifted, the refrain rising, and someone whispering through the little slit, "Stay with us, friends." You, with your straw helmet, feel like the chorus section of a very dedicated carol. Your old habits return as small comforts. You tell the bees the winter news because it helps to speak. "There was a wedding," you murmur, "and the baker's boy is taller, and the mill wheel froze last night, but the smith says he'll hammer it loose." Does it matter to insects? Maybe not. But the ritual warms your breath and steadies your hands. In a season where days are short and tempers can be shorter, any practice that softens you is useful. Joke one slips out before you can stop it. If you keep updating the hive this often, you'll have to start charging them rent for your winter podcast. You set mouse guards, tiny lattices that let bees pass and keep furry opportunists out. The beekeeper holds up his chewed glove as evidence of what happens when you forget. A mouse thinks a skep is luxury living, dry, warm, and stocked with the medieval equivalent of a dessert buffet. You reduce the doorway to a single bee's courage and sprinkle ash at the base to discourage nibblers. The smell of ash makes your helmet remember the summer smoker, and for a second your brain summons the warmth of July. Historians still argue whether most medieval keepers regularly fed bees in winter, by returning honey or warmed hydromel, or whether they relied solely on summer stores. Evidence is tricky when the feeding equipment was often a spoon and a steady hand. Some manor accounts hint at honey kept back for the bees' sustenance in bad years. Other records suggest colonies were culled after harvest rather than carried through. The debate hums like an argument behind a closed door, and you, standing in the frost, choose the path of generosity. A thin ladle of warmed honey at the rim, a kindness that might tip survival towards spring. You remember the apothecary's oxymel and chuckle at the memory of your sneeze. No vinegar tonight, only a little heat. You warm the spoon near a candle, letting the honey loosen to a slow ribbon, then offer it near the entrance. A few brave workers taste and relay the news inward, like waiters announcing the soup course to a crowded hall. You withdraw quietly, pleased that your hands didn't shake. Joke 2 sneaks in with the steam from your breath. You're essentially running a tiny bed and breakfast. Welcome to the woven dome. Breakfast is honey. Dinner is also honey. Check out in April. Wind is a teacher now. You feel it find every gap in your clothing and imagine it probing the straw weave for the same. You wedge willow hoops around each skep-like ribs, then lash on straw mats so the whole structure can shrug off gusts. The sound changes, a softer hiss instead of a rattle. It reminds you of that market day when bees tried to refund their honey from open jars. You still grin at the memory, a bit of summer in the breath cloud of winter. Mornings become a circuit of small mercies. Brush snow from skep shoulders. Tap lightly, just once, to feel for the answering tremor. Clear dead bees from the threshold with a twig, a solemn task that leaves you both sad and oddly grateful. Even in death, they tell you the cluster still holds. When the sun does appear, you angle a crude board to throw light onto the alcoves, a medieval solar panel composed of hope and guesswork. The warmth is modest, but you believe in it. This season, belief is another tool. Sometimes, in that deep blue hour before full dark, you remember the monks and their chant braided with bee hum. You hum now too, a steady low note through the straw, more for you than for them. The helmet resonates your private instrument, and the sound settles your nerves. Joke 3 taps you on the shoulder. You are officially a one-person medieval ASMR channel. Sound of frost on straw with occasional bee. You keep hearing ghost lore in the lanes. Someone swears a hive abandoned after a death will moan at night until told the news. Someone else swears feeding mead on Christmas Eve ensures a queen in spring. You catalogue these claims the way you catalogue cloud shapes. Maybe, maybe not, but looking up has never hurt anyone. And anyway, you already live by one superstition that works. When in doubt, slow down. The mainstream fact returns to frame your hope. A healthy winter cluster can keep itself at brood temperature even when the air could freeze your breath to glass. The colony is a furnace built of bodies and agreement. Your job is to keep that agreement from being broken by drafts, damp, hunger, or mice. Propolis, remember that piney resin the apothecary crumbled, is your ally here. The bees use it to gum shut seams, and you respect their carpentry by not prying at frozen lids. You've learned that not doing is also doing. By late winter, stores thin. You weigh the skeps in your palm, the way bakers weigh dough. Light is a warning. You offer another spoon, another warm word, another quick clearing of the entrance when a thaw clots it with melt. Sometimes you stand with your helmet tipped back, eyes closed, facing the pale sun like a turnip pretending to be a sunflower. You'd like to tell the bees it's working, that the light is returning, that catkins are swelling and the hedgerow is rehearsing green. Instead, you do the necessary thing. You keep watch. When snow finally crusts, the village quiets to an eggshell crackle underfoot. Children sled on shovel lids. The smith's smoke rises straight. The church bell sounds louder in cold air. Your route from skep to skep is muscle memory now, a rosary of small tasks. You never see the queen. You seldom see more than a few workers. Yet you feel accompanied, as if that summer choir has modulated into a single note that refuses to go out. You head home by the track where we once dusted a swarm with flour and where you once bobbed your helmet to a tavern song. The field is bare, but you can already imagine it printed with clover. Winter has taught you to love imagination, not for escape, but for planning. The bees are doing the same inside, budgeting heat, rationing sweetness, trusting that the world can afford a spring. You stop. At the last hive, lay your palm against the straw and wait out 3 slow breaths. There it is, the faintest tremor, more felt than heard, life bundled and stubborn. You tap the rim gently with a knuckle and whisper through the slit, hold fast. The hum answers. You smile into the cold, the helmet pressing your brow like a benediction, and set off, the promise of blossoms walking you back to the village. You stand at the hedge in the weak noon light, your breath no longer turning to frost, but still a little clouded, and your straw helmet scratches as if reminding you to speak softly. Winter has taught you patience, now spring asks for manners. You lean toward the nearest skep and do what the village expects. You tell the bees, not about flowers, they'll discover those on their own, but about people, births, deaths, promises, quarrels patched and unpatched. Your words slip through the entrance like warm air. The mainstream fact hums beneath your whisper, throughout medieval and later European tradition, traced in England, Ireland, Wales, Brittany and bits of Germany and the Low Countries. Keepers told the bees household news, especially death. Hives might be draped in a mourning cloth, sometimes literally tied with a strip of black, as if the little straw houses needed formal attire. Cakes from the funeral table could be shared at the hive, a sip of mead set by the entrance. Without these courtesies, people feared the bees would sulk, stop working, or worst of all, fly away. You press your gloved fingers to the woven dome, half ceremony, half comfort, and murmur a name with the gentleness of a secret. A quirky tidbit follows like a shy cousin. At weddings, some villages offered the bees a ribbon or a sugared crumb of the bride cake and asked them to wish the couple well. Hives were even given as wedding gifts, the ultimate dowry of light and sweetness, portable prosperity that buzzed. You picture yourself in a procession, helmet askew, carrying a skep like a round bouquet while the priest side-eyes you for smuggling livestock into a blessing. It's hard to look dignified when you're a walking wicker basket, but the gesture is pure. Invite the bees into the family story so they'll keep writing it in wax and honey. Historians still argue whether these customs arose from pre-Christian household spirit beliefs later baptized into Christian practice, or whether they're simply practical metaphors. Keep the hives calm by keeping the keepers calm. Some scholars say the rites were widespread. Others insist they were patchy, flaring in some valleys and vanishing in the next. You decide that arguments about borders don't matter much to bees, who draw their maps in circles of scent and sunlight rather than on parchment. You try another whisper, this one about a newborn. You give the hive a tiny tap, no banging pots this time, just that respectful knock you've learned, and offer a crumb of bread glazed with your best honey. The hum does not change. Bees are dignified about your announcements, yet the act steadies you. You realize these superstitions function like your winter rounds, small rituals that keep you consistent. If you honor the hive, you behave better with the humans inside your house too. The colony trains the keeper. Joke 1 arrives in a gentle buzz. You imagine launching an official service, Bee Announcements Inc., where you deliver village updates in your best bedside voice. Births, betrothals, bake sale times, all read through straw with complimentary hydromel. Honestly, your podcast already started in January. You circle to the next skep, remembering a different superstition. If the master dies, the bees must be introduced to the new one, or they'll pine. So you bow, the helmet creaks like a pew, and give your name as if shaking hands through the doorway. You even promise fair shares and steady work, which makes you sound like a minor lord of a very tiny manor. The bees answer with the same even hum they use for everything that isn't wind or wasp, but you feel the contract settle between you anyway. Another thread of lore says never scold or quarrel in front of the hives. Bees dislike discord and will mirror it. You think back to the apothecary's note that excessive melancholy displeases them, and you imagine the colony as a living barometer for household peace. An argument at dinner, and next day a cloud of temper at the skep. It's not science in the parchment sense, but it's not nonsense either. Colonies read vibration the way you read cloud lines. Your voice is part of their weather. You smooth your tone, an ASMR host for insects, and promise to keep your temper tied as neatly as your sleeve cords. Another quirky fringe detail. Some keepers lay a scrap of funeral cloth over each hive and turn the skep a hair to the left so the colony faces the procession, as if bees could watch and pay respects. Others clink a small bell at the entrance, 3 soft notes, before lifting the cloth on the 7th day. You try it now, a tiny ring that sounds like a teaspoon touching pottery. Your helmet magnifies the chime into your own head. The note lingers like a bead of honey on wood. Historians still argue whether these attentions spared colonies in times of grief, or whether the communities that practiced them simply paid closer attention and thereby saved more hives. You suppose both could be true. Ritual might be the form patience takes when hearts are heavy. You remember our old flower trick for marking swarms and grin at the image, a white speckled cloud, a white speckled keeper, a comedy of ownership. That one too has a superstitious cousin. Some villagers beat pans and sang to bring a swarm home, which you now reinterpret as giving anxious humans permission to do something, anything, besides panic. These days you opt for the smoker and the patient box, but you hum anyway for luck and for rhythm. Joke 2 flutters down. If music truly lures swarms, you should come. Mission a lute piece in C major called Please Land Lower. Not all tales are cheerful. A widow tells you that when her husband died, the hives fell quiet for 3 days until she shared funeral ale with them. Another says a neighbour forgot to tell the bees after a birth, and a week later a colony swarmed to the far wood, insulted. Whether cause or coincidence, the lesson is the same. Weave the bees into your family braid, or watch the plait loosen in your hands. You adjust a mourning ribbon you've left knotted since midwinter, now sun-faded to soft grey. The knot has become a little shrine of its own. Thread, wax smear, a pinch of propolis that glued it to the straw. Propolis again, the hive sealant and your symbolic one. You think of the apothecary crumbling it into wine, of the monks copying by beeswax light, of winter breakfasts at your tiny BB, and realize every superstition here points back to a practice: protect, polish, provision, and remember. Joke 3 sidles up in a whisper. If the bees truly dislike quarrels, you could rent them to the church as marriage counsellors. One look at the hive and couples would lower their voices to a respectful murmur, instant harmony restored by 6 pounds of diplomacy. You reach the last skep in the row, the same one you touched on that iron-tasting morning when frost rhymed the hedge. You rest your palm on the dome. Inside, the colony shifts like a thought taking shape. You think of all the things you've told them, the mead-fueled songs, the market haggles, The scholar with his ox-born theories, the child's sneaking comb, the winter spoon of warmth. You think of the punishment story you wish were only legend, and you tell the hive that you prefer candles to cudgels, care to spectacle. The hum continues, steady as a conscience that won't flicker. The mainstream fact circles back to anchor the moment. These observances endured for centuries because they stitched community around creatures that could leave at a moment's notice. A hive is wealth on wings. Ritual is the ribbon that says, stay. Even if bees don't pass words, they benefit from the calm that words create. That's science enough for today. As the sun lifts, the field takes on that pearly shimmer it gets just before spring commits to green. You tidy the ribbons, brush a few dead leaves from the skep shoulders, and tuck a crumb of honey cake at an entrance, half for folklore, half for ants to argue over later. Your helmet itches, your patience holds, your voice softens around one last update. The hedgerow is budding, the brook runs faster, and the children are already arguing about who will chase the first swarm. We'll manage it gently, you promise the hive, and perhaps yourself. You step back, listening for any change in the chord. It remains what it has always been, the note of work shared, of agreement kept. You bow, your straw-crowned head, scarecrow priest, beekeeper podcast, ginger honey latte enthusiast, and let the quiet swallow your smile. Then you shoulder your tools and head toward the path, already drafting the next message you'll deliver to the smallest, sweetest audience in the village. You follow the path you've worn all season and notice gently that the landscape is changing under your feet. The skeps still squat like straw pumpkins along the wall, bee bowls dappled with sunlight. But beside them sits something boxy, squared, suspiciously tidy. The beekeeper, older now, or maybe simply more practical, sets down a wooden hive with frames that whisper when he lifts them, a clean, decisive sound. Your helmet scratches, suddenly self-conscious, like a costume at the wrong party. You lay your palm on the new box and feel a different promise. Not just honey, but structure, storage, repeatability, the careful grammar of change. The mainstream fact, by the 19th century, the movable frame hive, most famously Langstroth's design from the 1850s, reshaped beekeeping across Europe and beyond. Its genius hinged on bee space, that Goldilocks gap of roughly a finger's width the bees won't fill with comb or glue. With frames kept at that spacing, you could open a hive, lift a comb, inspect brood, harvest honey, and return everything without wrecking the colony. Modern veils and smokers joined the toolkit, replacing straw helmets and rags of smouldering punkwood with wire mesh and bellows that puffed measured clouds. Your straw dome feels like a friendly antique, grandparent energy, useful in its day and still charming when the light hits it right. A quirky tidbit glints in the new gear. Early veils were sometimes sewn from black silk, horsehair netting, or even the gauzy curtains pinched from parlour windows, whatever let a keeper see without looking like a moth trapped in laundry. Some tinkerers attached the veil to a brimmed hat with upholstery tacks. Others wore fencing masks to the apiary, which must have made the neighbours whisper that you were duelling with breakfast. You pinch the edge of a modern mesh veil between your fingers and admit it. The visibility is luxurious. You can actually tell whether that tiny dot on the frame is a queen cell or a breadcrumb from lunch. Historians still argue whether straw helmets were ever standard across regions, or more a pictorial shorthand in manuscripts that loved round shapes and simple lines. They still argue, too, about the pace of the transition. Did skeps vanish quickly once frames arrived, or did they linger, stubborn and familiar, in hedgerows and small holdings well into the 20th century? Parish records, farm ledgers, and old photographs disagree like relatives at a reunion, everyone certain, everyone nostalgic. You stand between skep and box and feel the truth. Change rarely flips a switch. It hums along the fence line, one post at a time. The beekeeper lifts a frame, sunlight laying lace over the comb. You can watch brood, see the pattern of the queen's laying, spot trouble before it blooms. This is the quiet revolution, inspection, the ability to check, to intervene, to split, to spare. Diseases that once crept through villages like bad weather, foul brood, nosema. Meet a keeper who can actually open a hive, not unhouse it, and make decisions that save rather than sacrifice. Your helmet tilts at the memory of sulfur pit tales, the old stories of killing colonies to collect wax. You imagine history loosening a knot. Joke one tips your tongue. You look at the wooden boxes and think, ah yes, the bees have moved into apartments with reliable elevators. Skeps were cozy cottages, frames are tidy flats with efficient stairwells. The bees don't care what you call it as long as the rent, nectar, stays affordable. The smoker on the table is no longer a rag on a stick, but a metal can with a snout and a hinge. You squeeze the bellows and the smoke pearls out like a thoughtful dragon. The flame doesn't scorch your wrist hair as often. The smoke lasts longer than your nerve. You remember that winter's one-person ASMR joke and chuckle. Now you have a percussion instrument too. Puff, pause, puff. Your timing has improved and the bees respond in that same reliable way, lowering their pitch from intruder to we'll allow it. You watch the veil slip over the beekeeper's face and accept how gentle the change can feel. Vision is no longer tunneled through straw slits. You can meet a bee's approach with awareness rather than guesswork. Your breath no longer collects in the weave, pooling into warm fog. It wicks and vanishes, leaving you cooler, less claustrophobic, less likely to sneeze onto a queen by accident. Joke 2. You mentally retire your straw helmet with honours and imagine framing it like a family portrait. Great grand hat, patron of patience, retired due to improved visibility. The legal world budges too. In some places, skeps become discouraged or even banned because fixed combs make disease inspection impossible. Inspectors can't look, so keepers can't prove. The law leans toward the box it can open. Historians still argue whether those rules protected bees or protected commerce, whether the move privileged bigger operators who could afford boxes over small cottagers who could not. You stroke the grain of the hive body, thinking of markets and monasteries, of how light once belonged to wax and now to paraffin, then back to beeswax for those who prefer a steady flame. Change spirals like a coil of straw, looping but not quite returning to the same point. This new gear rearranges the map of work. You learn to wield a hive tool, to pry just so, to break propolis seals with the tact of a locksmith who loved the door he's opening. You learn to read frames like manuscripts, brood in the middle, pollen arcs, nectar glistening where honey will cap. You remember that monk's candle, illuminating pages that saved Aristotle's words, and realize a different kind of reading saves bees now, frame by careful frame. Joke 3 nods from the bench. You are a librarian of insects, re-shelving and indexing, shushing loud weather with a puff of smoke. Still, the skeps do not simply vanish from the edge of sight. An old woman keeps 2 under her lean-to because her hands know those curves better than corners. A boy points to the bee bowls and calls them the little chapels because his grandfather said the hives sang there in summer. You tell yourself and the bees, because habit holds, that change can honour memory. The flower-dusted swarm now lands in a cardboard box lined with gauze. The mead is poured from a cleaner cask. The apothecary's honey salve gets a boiled bandage. The melody remains. The instruments tune. You test your own fear. Without the straw helmet, do you feel less brave or more? The veil is lighter. The mesh doesn't jab your temple when you laugh quietly at your own jokes, which you still do. The bees, unchanged in purpose, feel closer. You watch their tongues probe a new nectar source, their legs loaded with colour you recognise from the hedgerow. You whisper, habit, superstition, soft science all braided, that you will try to be worth their work in any century that admits you. Historians still argue whether increased productivity from framed hives improved welfare for bees or merely for keepers, whether larger honey takes stressed the forage in lean years, or whether better control allowed colonies to split and multiply with fewer desperate swarms. The record is a chorus of field notes and ledger lines. You suspect the answer is like bee space itself. It depends on that just right gap between intention and attention. Boxes expand your choices. Character decides how you use them. A neighbour shows you an observation hive set behind glass, bees traversing their city where children press noses and ask perfect questions. You grin, remembering winter's promise to tell the bees everything, now inverted. The bees are telling the children. Dance angles and nectar maps, tiny teachers tapping chalk on wax. The veil powers down to a pane, curiosity powers up. Somewhere, a future keeper will sleep better because the mystery became a window rather than a wall. And what of the straw helmet? You don it one last time, just to feel the field again, to hear your own breathing round and warm, to smell the baked bread summer trapped in the weave, to carry the itch that taught you to move slowly. Then you lift the mesh veil and let it settle, and the world comes into focus not as betrayal but as gratitude. Every coil you wove turned into a step toward this clarity. Every sting taught you a patience these frames now reward. Box and skep sit shoulder to shoulder along the wall. You like it that way. Yesterday and today exchanging recipes, not insults. The bees accept both with equal pragmatism. Is there space? Is there bloom? Is there calm? You puff the smoker, lift a frame, and hear the familiar chord resume. Industry without hurry, agreement without speech. Change, you realize, is just another rhythm in the meadow. You adjust your grip, tuck your sleeves, and continue the song. The season leans toward dusk again, and you find yourself back at the meadow's edge, straw helmet in your hands instead of on your head. The weave is frayed now, edges softened, bits of stalk falling away like shed husks. You run your palm along the dome and feel every groove that once pressed your scalp, every prick that reminded you to slow down, every crease that made you ridiculous and, somehow, careful. The beekeeper watches quietly, then sets down his own, older, tighter woven, darker with smoke. Together, you look at the line of hives, some squat skeps, some wooden boxes, all vibrating faintly with that note you've come to trust. The mainstream fact: beekeeping survived every awkward experiment, from straw domes to movable frames, from whispered superstitions to printed manuals. The continuity was never the helmets or even the hives. It was the bees themselves, endlessly repeating their golden choreography across centuries. The straw helmets were stepping stones, allowing humans to stay close long enough to learn better methods. Without them, maybe fear would have kept us too far away to notice waggle dances or queen flights. The quirky tidbit: in some rural corners, straw helmets lingered even into the 19th century as ceremonial gear, worn not for safety but for tradition. In certain English processions, villagers dressed in straw hats and veils to honour bees at midsummer, as though the helmet had graduated from protection to costume, from necessity to nostalgia. You imagine joining such a parade, helmet itching as always, but this time on purpose, celebrated for the very absurdity that once made you blush. Historians still argue whether the helmet was ever widespread or just a patchwork habit in scattered valleys. Was it everyday armour or simply symbolic, immortalised by scribes who loved to draw round hats? They can debate forever. The hum doesn't mind. The beat. as keep at their work, ignoring the question marks humans pile at their door. You think back through the seasons, that first awkward tug of straw, the smell of herbs tucked between coils, the monks chanting beside their wax-lit manuscripts, the tavern laughter over mugs of mead, the market's sticky haggling, the hush of winter vigil, the odd punishments you still hope were more myth than truth, the scholars with their ox-born theories, the superstition of telling bees your secrets. Each fragment clings to the helmet like propolis binding a hive, messy, sticky, but impossibly strong. You lift the helmet to your head one more time just to feel the scratch and the narrowed vision. The meadow becomes tunnel-like, the world a little dimmer, your breath louder in your ears. For a heartbeat, you are again that clumsy scarecrow trembling near skeps, not yet knowing how to move slowly. Then you remove it, replace it on the grass, and the view widens. The wooden boxes gleam, the skeps still hum, the bees wheel in figure eights you now understand. The lesson is not to abandon the old or idolize the new, but to carry the patience each taught you. Joke one hums softly. You decide the straw helmet deserves retirement, maybe hung over a hearth with a plaque. Patron saint of itchy foreheads and over-cautious beginners. Joke 2. You wonder whether the bees themselves ever laughed at you, buzzing to each other, "Look, here comes the haystack again." Joke 3. You imagine future keepers donning replicas just for fun, cosplay for apiarists who want to know how ridiculous history felt. The beekeeper claps your shoulder, smoke from his new can curling lazily into the sky. You both look at the hives, skeps and boxes, past and present, and know the melody will outlast you. The bees don't mind which roof you give them as long as the flowers keep their promises. And so, with a scratchy hell, met on the ground and a lighter veil in your hand, you walk away, listening to the hum that will still be here long after your boots wear through. And now, as the meadow fades, you feel the pace loosen, each breath lengthening, each step softer. The hives glow dimly in memory, straw domes and wooden boxes alike becoming silhouettes against the horizon. The bees inside continue their patient murmur, wings moving in steady rhythm, as if the earth itself is rocking you toward rest. You sense the straw helmet resting nearby, not on your head now, but on the grass, a relic at peace. Its itch no longer nags you, its weight no longer presses. It has become part of the meadow, blending into the reeds, dissolving into the season's hush. You breathe in slowly and let that imagined scent of honey and warm straw settle into your chest. Every image softens. The market square blurs into gentle background noise, voices drifting like echoes. The apothecary's jars fade to faint glassy glints. The monk's chants dissolve into the same low hum as the bees. Even the tavern's laughter feels muted now, as if coming from a room 2 doors away, safe and harmless. What remains is calm, the simple vibration of wings, steady, eternal, carrying you towards sleep. You picture yourself lying back in the meadow, helmet beside you, sky deepening into velvet blue. The bees, tucked in their hives, form clusters of warmth. Just as you pull blankets a little higher, they keep watch while you rest, their hum as gentle as the whir of a fan in the distance. And so, with patience woven through straw and with sweetness pressed into memory, you let yourself drift. The story has quieted, the images softened, the world becomes smaller and safer. You close your eyes, the hum continues. And sleep arrives, steady and kind,